Karen Sterling wasn't just rude. She was a menace, a customer from hell, the type of person who didn't just complain. She destroyed. She made it her mission to humiliate anyone she considered beneath her, and to her, that included every single service worker. Karen didn't just demand perfection. She used people to feed her ego. She had thrown a glass of water at a waiter because it wasn't cold enough, mocked a barista until she cried, just for misspelling her name, gotten a cashier fired because she didn't like his tone. Power. That's what Karen thrived on. She wasn't a CEO, she wasn't a billionaire, but in her mind, she was better than everyone, and if breaking someone down reminded them of their place, then so be it. That night, Karen had a new target. A high-end restaurant had just opened in the city, Elysium Fine Dining. It was the kind of place where dinner costs more than a mortgage payment. The wait list stretches for months. Only the elite get through the doors. Karen loved places like this. Not for the food, not for the atmosphere, but because they gave her a new playground, a new stage to make someone feel small. She strolled through the entrance with her group of wealthy socialites, her heels clicking against the polished marble floors. She wanted a perfect night, a perfect meal, and of course, a perfect opportunity to remind some underpaid waiter of their place. She had no idea she was walking into her own humiliation. The restaurant was breathtaking, exactly what Karen expected. Crystal chandeliers sparkled above the lavish dining hall, the scent of truffle and aged wine floating through the air. Every waiter moved gracefully, their uniforms crisp, their manners impeccable, flawless, just the way Karen liked it, until he arrived, a young black man. Dressed in a sharp, black and gold uniform, approached the table. He moved with calm confidence, holding the menu with practiced ease. His smile was warm, welcoming. "Good evening, ladies," he said smoothly. "Welcome to Elysium Fine Dining. I'll be your server tonight." But before he could finish his sentence, Karen's face twisted, her brows furrowed, her lips curled in distaste, and then she scoffed loudly. "Oh, let me guess," Karen sneered, tilting her head. "You must have wandered in here by accident." The table went silent. A few heads turned from nearby tables. The young waiter didn't flinch, but Karen wasn't done. She leaned forward, voice dripping with condescension. "I highly doubt someone like you belongs in a place this high-end." The air grew heavy. A waitress standing nearby froze mid-step, her eyes widening. Other guests at nearby tables glanced over, sensing the tension. But the waiter, he didn't react. Instead, he simply smiled. "How can I assist you tonight, ma'am?" he asked, his tone unshaken. Karen rolled her eyes, grabbing the leather-bound menu. She didn't even bother opening it. Instead, she flipped her wrist and let it drop onto the table with a loud slap. Then she laughed. "I'm not taking orders from you." She flicked her hand toward the kitchen. "Go get me the manager, now." The young waiter remained still. He didn't argue, didn't defend himself, didn't even blink. Instead, he simply nodded. "Of course," he said, calmly stepping away. Karen smirked, pleased with herself. She had put him in his place. She had won, or at least that's what she thought. Because in just a few minutes, Karen was about to realize the biggest mistake of her life. Karen leaned back, crossing her arms, a smug grin spreading across her face. She had humiliated that waiter, put him in his place. And now, the manager would come crawling over, apologizing and assigning someone more suitable to serve her. At least, that's what she thought. But then, something strange happened. Instead of heading to the kitchen, the young man walked past it. Then he kept going, straight to the center of the restaurant, onto the main stage, and then he picked up the microphone. Karen's smirk wavered. What the hell was happening? A gentle chime rang through the restaurant speakers as the young man cleared his throat. Then, in a voice calm yet powerful, he spoke. "Good evening, ladies and gentlemen," he said, his eyes sweeping across the room. "My name is Jordan Carter. A few guests gasped. A soft murmur spread through the crowd. Karen's smile vanished. Wait, that name, it sounded familiar, but before she could place it, Jordan continued. I am the owner of this restaurant, he said smoothly, and not just this one, but all 10 of the most exclusive fine dining restaurants in the city. Karen's stomach dropped, her face drained of color. This couldn't be happening. She looked around, expecting someone to correct him, expecting someone to laugh and say it was a joke. But no one did, because it wasn't. People were whispering, staring, all at her, and then Jordan turned directly toward Karen. And tonight, he said, his voice sharp but controlled, I was personally insulted by one of our guests, simply because of the color of my skin. Silence. A heavy, suffocating silence dropped over the restaurant. Karen's heart pounded. Every single person in the room knew exactly who he was talking about. She wanted to sink into the floor, but there was no escape. Because in that moment, Karen wasn't the one giving orders. She was the one on trial. She came in expecting to be treated like royalty. Instead, she became the evening's entertainment. Karen's hands gripped the edge of the table, her nails digging into the fine linen. Her heart pounded, her face burned hot. She could feel hundreds of eyes drilling into her, the weight of the entire restaurant's attention crushing down on her. This wasn't supposed to happen. She was supposed to be in control, and yet, here she was. The prey, not the predator. You wanted the manager? A waiter approached her table, his expression polite, but his eyes ice cold. Madam, he said, voice smooth, controlled, our owner would like to have a word with you. Karen's stomach twisted. The waiter stepped aside, and there he was, Jordan Carter, the same man she had just insulted, except now, he wasn't just a lowly waiter, he was her worst nightmare. He approached slowly, his confidence radiating like fire, his sharp suit tailored to perfection, and then he stopped, right in front of her, and smiled, a smile filled with power, with knowing, with amusement. Karen's throat went dry. So, Jordan said, his voice just loud enough for the entire restaurant to hear, you asked to see the manager, correct? Karen's breath hitched. You had a complaint? He continued, tilting his head. About me? Karen opened her mouth. Nothing came out. She could hear people whispering, feel the heat of a dozen phones recording. A woman at a nearby table gasped, then smirked. A man at the bar raised an eyebrow, shaking his head. Jordan leaned in just slightly, his voice dropping into something sharp and deliberate. Go ahead, he said smoothly. Tell me exactly what you don't like about your waiter. She could feel her entire world crumbling. Just minutes ago, she had been the one in charge, mocking, insulting, demanding. Now she was powerless. Her face burned red, her palms were sweaty, her mind screamed for a way out, but there was none. Because, for the first time in her life, Karen was the one being judged. She spent her whole life tearing others down. Now she was the one being erased. Karen's hands trembled. Her mouth opened, closed. She tried to speak, to excuse herself, to twist the story, to reclaim control. But no one cared. No one wanted to hear her lies. The room was already against her, and then Jordan delivered the final blow. You are not welcome here. Jordan Carter took a step back, his expression calm, composed, but final. This restaurant, he said, voice smooth but firm, was built on excellence, respect, dignity. He let the words linger in the air, then his. Eyes locked onto Karen's. And we do not welcome guests who choose to degrade others based on race, status, or entitlement. Karen stiffened. A few people murmured in agreement. Then Jordan delivered the final humiliating verdict. As a policy of Elysium fine dining, he smiled. But more importantly, as a policy of myself, you are officially banned from ever returning to this restaurant permanently. For a moment, dead silence, then The first round of applause, then another. Then the entire restaurant erupted into cheers. Waiters smiled. Guests whispered, clapped, shook their heads. In disgust at Karen, a woman at the bar raised her wine glass and toasted. Karen, she stood frozen, her face pale as a ghost. You can't, she started, her voice shaky. Jordan lifted a hand, a subtle but powerful signal. 2 restaurant staff members appeared at Karen's side. She flinched. Madam, one of them said, stone-faced, please leave the premises immediately. Karen stumbled back, feeling the walls closing in. This is ridiculous, she screeched. I'll call my lawyer. But her words meant nothing, because at that moment she was no longer a feared customer. She was just a nuisance, a problem to be removed. And so she was. As she was escorted to the front door, her heels clacked unevenly against the floor. Whispers. He followed her, eyes watched, judged. Someone laughed. Another guest took out their phone, recording the whole thing. When she reached the entrance, the heavy double doors swung open, and standing outside, a small crowd of people waiting to get in. They stared, some whispered, one person smirked, Karen's face burned, and before she could say another pathetic excuse, the doors swung shut, slamming her out of that world, forever. She had spent her life belittling others, mocking service workers, thinking she was untouchable. But in one single night, she was the one who was humiliated, and the worst part, she knew that by tomorrow morning, her shame would be viral. The world would see her for exactly what she was, and there was nothing she could do to stop it.